Welcome to Muffin Talk.
Kia ora and welcome to Muffin Talk. This program is brought to you by the initiative Titipounamu, Study and Joy. My guest today is Joerg Rieger. Joerg is a German and American professor of Christian theology with a special emphasis on economic justice and political movements. He is the author and editor of more than 27 books and over 200 academic articles, and he is also an ordained minister of the United Methodist Church. With wars raging in so many parts of the world at the moment, we might almost forget that the planet is in crisis. For many years, we have been warned that the Western economies are too dependent on burning fossil fuels, which contributes to a human-made climate change. There are some powerful people who are currently referring to God at the same time as they are refusing to care for our Earth. Joerg, first of all, thank you very much for joining and welcome to this program.
Thank you. Yes.
You are a theologian and you're specialized on economic justice. How do you see these economic and environmental challenges?
Well, I think the most important thing is that everything is connected. So if you think about, usually we think of religion as in a separate category than the economy or the environment or politics for that matter. That's how modernity has trained us, right? If you go to university, you study this subject or you study something else. But oftentimes we're not looking at how these things are together. In the modern academy, people are coming back to studying things in interdisciplinary fashion. So you bring the various disciplines together. But I often remind people and say, well, we're doing this interdisciplinary work because life is interdisciplinary. Everything is always connected. And so as a theologian who's dealing with questions of faith and God and all of this, I'm asking questions about how is our faith in God connected to how we're dealing with the world, how we're dealing with, our economic interests, how we're doing politics. So put all that together and, some new questions emerge. And that's what I'm pursuing. So, for instance, if you then look at ecological struggles that we find ourselves in, you can say, well, there are various causes of it, right? There is certainly a cultural cause. People are not paying attention. They don't care for the earth, like you said. But that cultural cause is tied to other causes. There's a religious cause. So it's the way people think about God that matters. Some people think about God as an otherworldly issue. So the God thing then pulls their interests away from the world. I'm saying there's a connection. We think about God the way we think about the world. Of course, then there comes the economy. We can talk about that in a minute. But I'm also arguing that the way we're doing our economic business these days is also part of the problem. So economy contributes to the deterioration of the environment. Images of God contribute. Various factors all come together. And what I'm interested in is not just to point out the problems. I'm also curious about the solutions.
Well, that's very important. And as a Christian, I think that hope and finding ways to solve an issue should always be there. And you also talked about a materialistic spirituality. So I understand that you advocate for this materialistic spirituality, which is centered on working to improve the material conditions of the marginalized. And so when we're talking about hope, we also have to give hope to those who are not the ruling class or not the rulers and the marginalized. So can you tell us more about this idea?
So this sounds strange, right? People think spirituality means that which is not material. So putting material concerns and spirituality together at first sight sounds contradictory, right? Either you're spiritual or you're material. But I'm a Christian theologian, and if you look at the ministry of Jesus, the interesting fact is that spirituality and material concerns are always together. So Jesus doesn't distinguish. I mean, it's always both, right? Forgiving sins, healing people is related. And so you have a very deep interest in the well-being of people. And that's happening here and now. This is part of what I mean by materialistic spirituality. Sometimes people ask questions, is there life after death? That's an important theological question. But I often respond by saying, well, you can only address this question if you tell me if there's life before death, right? Can we say there is life before death? Because for a lot of people, this is tough. Life is tough. And, certainly people who are economically deprived, that's a problem. But now with these wars, so many millions of people are being displaced. We still have huge inequalities in this world. And it's oftentimes the majority of humanity that has to raise this question, is there life before death? And so the answer then is to say, again, like I just said, with God and the environment and the
Mhm.
economy, if everything is related together, how do we think about spirituality in this way? Now, there's a materialistic spirituality that is very problematic. That's also very popular around the globe. In the US, we call this the gospel of prosperity. And this is, these TV preachers, oftentimes it's preachers on television, right, that tell people, you have to send me money. Money will produce more money. And so prosperity here means that somebody's going to get rich through the gospel. Of course, the promise is you send some TV preacher some money and then you will strike it rich. That's the idea of the gospel of prosperity. The truth is, this doesn't usually work so well. And so a lot of people get duped, not only duped, but blamed then. If it doesn't work, it's their own fault. And the preachers get rich, and the rich stay rich, and the poor stay poor. So the gospel of prosperity in this way is really a fraud. It doesn't work. Now, those people who realize this oftentimes draw the wrong conclusions and say we shouldn't be so materialistic. We should just focus on spiritual values. But my counter argument is to say, well, Jesus had his own gospel of prosperity, which is very different from the gospel of prosperity, right? Because prosperity here doesn't mean the rich fly around the world in private jets. It means everybody has enough to live. It means the flourishing of life. It's good news for the poor, and that's literal, right? I mean, good news for the poor, which Jesus preaches at several places in the Gospels, is well, what do people think good news for the poor is, right? They think, well, maybe giving somebody a hot meal or a bed to sleep for the night, that's good news. Well, that's fine news. But really good news for the poor is you will no longer be poor. So if that's the gospel, if that's Jesus' spirituality, I'd say that might be something for Christians to follow. Now, think about that not just in terms of Christianity, think of it more broadly. I mean, take the Abrahamic religions, that's Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, where you have similar insights, right? The flourishing of life, the promise of salvation, especially in the Old Testament, or some call it the Hebrew Bible, is not primarily that you go to heaven. That's a different. That's more a New Testament thing. But salvation there means, I make your people live well. I will lead you out of slavery. I will lead you out of captivity. This is the promise, and you find similar insights in Islam. Of course, other world religions could be quoted here as well. So what I'm saying is spirituality, um, the kind that's really worth pursuing, always puts the material and the spiritual together. And the spiritual then, of course, doesn't go away, but it is in the service of the flourishing of life rather than in the service of another world and leaving this world as quickly as possible.
And also, what I was just thinking when you talked about giving food or giving something to somebody who is in need. And in English, you have the word charity, which is often confused as giving from top down. You give out of your abundance a little bit for somebody else to just survive. Whereas when you go back to the Latin root, it is the love of your neighbor. So you're not giving because you have enough to give to somebody else, but you give because you love the other as the neighbor. And the other thing that I was thinking of when you just what you just mentioned is the story about Zacchaeus, who had the material, and then when he had the spiritual enlightenment, he gave generously of his material because it wasn't important anymore for him. Important was that Jesus chose him to stay with him.
And that those that he had defrauded would have enough to live also. So there's a concern for the neighbor again. I appreciate what you're saying about charity, this relationship to the neighbor, because too oftentimes today charity has become a patronizing thing that's top down, somebody giving somebody else something, a one-way street, so to speak. Whereas in my work, I put charity and solidarity together.
Mm.
My most recent book is titled Theology in the Capitalocene. That's a quip on how we can describe the current age as not the Anthropocene, it's capital rules. And in this world, the alternative comes by solidarity. So it's not about individual profit for or winner takes all, but it is about solidarity with the neighbor. And as Martin Buber, a Jewish philosopher, sort of translated that love your neighbor as yourself, in it was in terms of how do you understand that your neighbor is part of yourself. So
Mm.
it's not just your neighbor is separate from you and you have to do something, but you have to understand that you're all always already connected. That's the basis for solidarity. And that to me is really also at the core of this materialistic spirituality.
I remember that in one of the documents that I read from you, you mentioned the situation of COVID and the essential workers, the people we often forget. That you think, oh, yeah, the important workers are these ones. But then when you come to a situation where you're dire straits, that's when you realize who are the essential workers and are we seeing them?
That was a huge recognition. I mean, I sort of understood these things at the time, perhaps, but to call these workers essential workers, I think that was the huge shift because, at some level we understand that we need people working in grocery stores or in fields or in hospitals for us to survive. But to say that survival is not possible without the essential work of these workers, that was a huge insight. And it goes back to the neighbor, love your neighbor as yourself, right? Because without these neighbors, we would not be here. We would not survive. So there's this deep connectedness, and that too is part of your spirituality. Thinking about labor now as part of spirituality. That's a big piece of my recent book, this Capitalocene book, is to say we have to reclaim labor relationships because labor relationships exist if we like it or not. 99% of us have to work for a living. That's the other insight
Mhm.
that people often forget. But the question is, how do we design these labor relationships in such a way that they're more egalitarian, that they're democratic? We always think of democracy and politics, but now what if we think about democracy and economics? And then for a theologian to say that, of course, we now have to think about God in relation to this essential work, the economy that is, undergirding it, and so on. And how could we do better? That to me is the question, because for a lot of people, this is not working so well.
And so the title capitalist scene, so just to make it clear for people, that translates into the world of capitalism, right?
It does. I mean, it's a little bigger than just the notion of capitalism. I mean, the basic problem here, well, let me put it this way. A lot of people know that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. I mean, just Google it, right? People would be able to find surprising numbers. And COVID-19 was a time when the rich still got richer and substantially so. So in this Capitalocene, we're talking about this structure where the rich are getting richer and the rest of us are somehow left out. And that's more and more not only the problem of the poor and working people. It is really the problem of professionals, university professors like myself. I mean, I'm an elite professor at an elite university, and we're feeling the pressure, capitalism and the capitalocene breathing down our neck. So it's this uh, primacy of money and profit for the few that takes away from the interest of the many. That's the problem. And capitalocene then is coined as a response to this idea of the Anthropocene. So the Anthropocene is usually seen as this is the age, the geological age, right before it comes to Holocene, the Pleistocene. The Holocene is the last 11,000 years since the Ice Age. And then the Anthropocene supposedly is the geological age when humanity is taking over the planet. But those of us, and I'm not the only one who are talking about the Capitalocene, are saying this is a geological age where the planet is reshaped by the interests of money. So suffering here are not just the poor and people under pressure, but also the non-human environment, the earth, right? CO2 emissions is a great example because that is one of the biggest driver perhaps of global warming that we're seeing. But a lot of people don't know that 71% of CO2 emissions are actually produced by the economic interests of 100 corporations. If you think about it this way, you say, wow, why did I never know this? And what can we do about it? So by naming it, we're also saying maybe we can address it.
I remember a discussion that we had at the university many years ago when we talked about a minimum wage and a maximum wage. And there were huge discussions. Should we have both of them? If we have a free market, we shouldn't have neither one. But then at the same time, a free market without solidarity is like a Wild West.
And the crazy thing about the free market is that the more unequal it becomes, the less it is free. I mean, that's the weird thing, right? People think the free market is free if nobody does anything. Uh, but when Adam Smith was initially thinking about the free market in the 18th century in England, what you're basically getting is there's some inequality there, of course. But if you think about the economy of a village or of a town, you have five bakers, and there's a free market among the five bakers. I grew up in Germany. We had a couple of bakeries. There was something like a free market there, which wasn't that bad. And you can say, as Smith did, for this market, the self-interest of the baker is enough. That gives us our bread. We buy our bread. Everybody's happy. But now somebody starts a factory, a baking factory, right? And that's not the biggest problem either. But now somebody starts a global baking corporation where they produce stuff very cheaply somewhere else and then it gets shipped. And all of a sudden, you can say it's still a free market, but it is always skewed towards the more powerful, the wealthy, and so on.
And we don't all have the same chances at the beginning. So our starting points are
Yes,
different,
yes,
which
that's right. That's
is another
important.
big
Yes,
point. So
right.
when we're talking about being Christians and people of hope, how I went to a talk some years ago where the discussion was how does God look like? But it's more about how do we wish God would be in order to help giving us hope. What shape do you think of God would we need now in an ideal world? To
So
reach
this
an
is
ideal world,
yes.
maybe this.
This is sort of the question that most interests me. When I talk about the economy, when I talk about the environment, people sometimes think I'm mostly a social critic, but I'm asking the God question, and in very serious fashion. I mean, again, if you start with Christianity, and we just got through Easter, right? You got a God that's very different. I mean, this is a God in the Jesus image that is born in humble beginnings, that never moves up and out, that stays in solidarity with the people, that is crucified. And of course, the cross here, the Romans didn't crucify it indiscriminately. They crucified political people who are politically dangerous. And so, Jesus then gets crucified as somebody who has some power with the people. And then, of course, this is the Jesus who gets resurrected on Easter. So God actually puts God's self on the side of this fairly radical organizer that brings people together and that works for a better life with this materialist spirituality. So Jesus here for Christians, I think, could be a very radical God image because it is sort of helping us rethink who God is. And for those of us, that also follow the ancient creeds, the Nicene Creed talks about Father and Son, first and second person of the Trinity being of the same substance. So if what we see in Jesus is part of the substance of God, that's very powerful. That's just one image, right? So now we're rethinking God in the image of Jesus for Christians. I mean, let me go back to the Abrahamic traditions here for a minute. In the beginning, in the creation stories, and this is stories that Christians and Jews, I mean, we have the same texts here.
Mm.
You have this image of God in the second creation story, planting a garden and creating Adam from clay. This we're sort of we take we know this, but we don't think about it. But what it really means is here God is actually presented as a working person. So we're talking about essential workers. God's now an essential worker because the story could have easily said God hired a bunch of agricultural workers or some angels and put them to work, and had some potters to make Adam from clay, and thereby, the divine would not have had the divine hands get dirty. That's sort of the other thing
And he
here,
even gave his
right?
own breath. So that connects
Yes,
in the
yes.
soil, the human being, and the breath of God. So all connected.
Very materialistic spirituality again, right? By
Mm.
the way, the Hebrew word spirit, ruach, is is the word for breath, for wind, breath, that sort of thing. So there's another expression of the spirit that's in the Hebrew tradition very material. So it's not ethereal metaphysics, but it's wind, it's breath, it's life. That's the spirit. So once you put all that together, and by the way, in the Quran, we don't have the story, I believe, of God planting a garden, but God's making Adam from dust in the Quran. So the Muslim traditions here have a similar idea of God acting like a worker rather than God acting like the boss. So once you put all that together, and then of course the Exodus traditions, again, this is what all three Abrahamic traditions have together. You have God in this miracle in the burning bush, and imagine now God comes speaking to Moses through the burning bush. And the miracle usually is seen as, well, the story says there's a bush that's in flames, but that does not get consumed. Okay. But the bigger miracle to me is that God is speaking through Moses. And by the way, this is what in Islam the miracle is seen is the miracle is the revelation of God in the bush. That's how Muslims read the miracle, and I think we could learn something from that, and then add to it what is God saying, right? Because not only is God speaking, but God is talking about how God sees the suffering, how he hears the cries. And once you have all that together, I mean, talk about images of God. This is a God in solidarity. This is not somebody aloof on a throne or uninterested or somehow some authoritarian ruler. I mean, this is the big problem with God. We see that in the US right now, that so many people think God is somehow the ultimate authoritarian who somehow looks and acts like the current American president. That is a mistake. I think this is a theological fallacy that we have to correct, and we have the tools to correct it, like use the examples I just gave.
But also in the Abrahamic traditions, we all have some expressions of the merciful God. God and
Yes.
mercy are very strongly connected in the Abrahamic traditions. So that's I think that also gives us hope.
Yes, the basis of the covenant is this mercy. So this is crucial to see, and this is the same for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. So for us to see that God's love, God's mercy is what ultimately moves this, rather than God's wrath or God's vengeance. Uh, Well, I mean, if there is pushback, so God's in some cases, also taking sides against Pharaoh, against the Egyptian Empire, against the Babylonian Empire, and so on. If there is pushback, it is because it benefits the people. It is
Mhm.
not because there is some authoritarian who has a grudge, or he's just a mean person, or he always has to kick some dog,
But also
That's
the word mercy again, because my roots are in linguistics. I always try to find out what is the origin of the word. In English, you don't hear it very well. In German, with Barmherzigkeit or the Latin misericordia, you still have the word Herz or heart in it.
that
And
is right.
so
Yes.
this is something I find really important because, again, mercy it can be misunderstood, but it's also a decision with a heart. And it's not just the pure judgment. This person has stolen this from, but there might be a reason because that child was so hungry. And so we come to these points, but I think that this is important for us to keep our hope alive in no matter what is happening.
Yeah. The best text for me that I often quote here is Mary's song of praise, the Magnificat in the Gospel
Mm,
of Luke in the beginning, where you see the mercy. God is lifting up the lowly servant. God is filling the hungry with good things. And then you see mercy and justice related because then God lifts up the hungry and pushes the powerful from their thrones. God lifts up, God fills the hungry with good things and sends the rich away empty. So that's of course,
mhm,
the part that a lot of people want to forget, but it belongs together because part of this mercy is to end the exploitative relationship, to end the situation where the capitalist scene ultimately not only kills people but the planet. So we need to stop this if we want to survive. I mean, the planet will be surviving. I don't think that the Earth will blow up anytime soon, but humanity might not fare so well if we're not paying attention. And so many people are already suffering in a great deal. And that's the ultimate challenge that I see, and for that, having more appropriate images for God is part of the alternative that we're trying to work for.
mm,
By the way, if people are interested, this is the work we're doing at my institute at Vanderbilt, which is called the Wendland Cook Program in Religion and Justice. And that's a complicated name, but you can find us easily. Our website is one word, religionandjustice.org. So just type in religion and justice, one word.org, and you get to the program. This is the program where we're doing the kind of things that I was just talking about.
yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I'll put the link also up on my website. Thank you so
Thank you.
much,
Yes.
Jörg. I think that we could continue for quite a while because I think there are so many interesting points, but I think it's good to get the thoughts started on what can we do. And also we are living in a world where we are closely connected. And we are often said we are a globalized world, but we have to globalize solidarity the same way as we do with economy. And
Yes.
that's also important. Thank you so much.
Yes. Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
Out there, heroic peace is calling. In the bonds of love we meet. For the world, a new day dawning and shining.